In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbartis, Lizzy Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, the podcast where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Chad Robinson, and joining me tonight are my good friends and co-hosts, Brian Fry and Lizzy Haynes. Brian, we'll start with you. How you doing tonight?
Good. I'm happy to be here. It was a rough day to make it, but good to be.
He's late and possibly hallucinating, so he's hearing weird music in his head.
That was real, man. I don't know where it was coming from, but that was real.
I will pray for you. Lizzy, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Excited to talk about this movie, particularly with you guys. I think this is going to be a really fun show.
Lizzy is not haunted over there. All right, Russell's prepared some questions for us. Brian, we'll start with you. Today we're going to talk about a film with a lot of grand battles. When you want to watch a great battle scene, what film are you putting on?
I mean, it's got to be the Charge of the Rohirrim in Return of the King. Like I can't tell you how often I'll just pull up YouTube just to hear his speech before writing in on that. Yeah, I mean, that's, I saw one of those reels or shorts or TikTok, whatever you want to call them. But I saw one, it's like, I want to go quietly in my bed. Me, Dad! And I was like, yeah, that. But I do want to give hats off to another. This one's more obscure. I don't think it gets enough credit, but that initial attack in the beginning of The Revenant.
Okay.
Like that's a great... It's not a huge battle scene, but it's big enough and it's really intense. And I've been like, man, that got your heart racing for what ends up being a relatively slow movie.
Yes, you're not talking about the bear, you're talking about the battle.
Correct. Yeah, that right there at the beginning when they all have to escape on the pelt boat. Oh man, yeah. I was just like, oh man.
Lizzy, what are you
I've
watching?
Never seen The Revenant.
Are you a grand scale battle type person?
Oh man, I mean, you guys probably could have guessed. I am not. So I totally appreciate the purpose of battles, and I do like of showing them, and I do really appreciate when they're epic. But I am also one of those people that's kind of the camp that like the Lord of the Rings didn't need to be so incredibly long and extended across all of these movies just to show so many epic battles. I know, I'm sorry, but it's just my opinion. But I do love them. I'm a Tolkien fan. I literally grew up reading The Hobbit. So like I'm a fan, I promise. For me, this is kind of a silly answer, but just the first one that popped in my head was the was the battle in the Chronicles of Narnia. It's like the first thing that popped in my brain because it's like so epic. You have like Tilda Swinton with like Aslan's mane and like polar bears fighting leopards and the Susan and her bow and arrow. And I feel like probably for a lot of the same reasons why like Lord of the Rings and all that is so great is that it's a battle scene and it's certainly a huge turning point in the movie, but there's just so much adventure and fantasy kind of wrapped in it as well that it's super, super entertaining.
That is my go-to battle scene on LSD. Like all the animals.
Griffins flying.
Yes.
Why not? Was it? Well, and there was a good one at the end of Prince Caspian too.
There really was. You have like Peter has his like moment.
Yeah. I was just gonna say I was reading up after you dropped that question. I was just reading up on some stuff on like who people think are the best, and on this one website they've got Helm's Deep is number one, and I feel like that was the best example of being yanked out of a battle scene when you never wanted it to yank you. Like, I'd almost want a cut of Lord of the Rings where it's just Helm's Deep, like all of it, and then
Yes.
then the Ents, Merry Pippin and the Ents. Like, don't pull me away from this for Merry Pippin and an Ent. Stop that.
That is dramatic, like shifting to tree beard.
It is such a gear. It is a violent gear shift.
Well, you took mine, Brian.
I don't know if it's cheating or not, but because it's technically not a movie, but the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones, that was like that. I could have literally watched that episode on loop. Like, that was an epic battle scene. Like, one from start to finish, I was obsessed with that episode.
That counts.
I swore up and down I wasn't going to go hard tangents on this episode, but like, who doesn't love a good
5 minutes in?
Who doesn't love a good reinforcement scene? There's something about like, you could even go deeper into this. It doesn't even have to be a good battle scene. What are your top 5 best reinforcement showing up scenes? Because
on your left.
All of them give me goosebumps. Yeah. On your left was awesome.
That's a good one. I forgot about that.
In game, the last or the Ride of the Rohirrim was a reinforcement scene. Like, reinforcement showing up is always one of the best. Like, I'm not saying do it. I want to be clear. I'm not saying do it. But if it makes you want to cheer in a movie, that's a cool scene. But don't do it.
Agreed.
People cheered in Infinity Wars. I mean, that for
they sure did.
Yeah.
Well, when Thor showed up?
Like no,
you guys are really screwed now.
Yeah, they all. Oh my gosh, that was a big one. I forgot all about that, but I don't know how I did because I am constantly seeing iterations of that scene where they'll like replace like the Falcon with like something else, and
like Xbox, PlayStation, and everything showing up to beat the crap out of PC or something. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen a bunch of those.
It's so still very much in the zeitgeist, but I forgot all about that.
Well, Brian took mine. It's
because it's the best.
It's weirdly the scene like when I feel like I need to cry. I will watch this. Like, it gets me all emotional. So that is the scene I will watch, and I will have a manly cry over men charging to their death. That women have other means, like you guys go watch a sad scene from The Notebook or whatever, which makes a whole lot more sense. I said or whatever, and that seems more dismissive. This is my go-to cry.
Oh, speaking of which, have you watched it yet, Fry? You know you have to at some point. Well, now you do. You are like contractually obligated as a roundtable member. Now you have to watch.
I feel like there's a ticking clock. I'm going to put up on my wall. Like, I'm just wait till the last.
I'm telling you, I think you'll really like it. I think that there are pieces of it. I know that this is not what you were here to talk about today, but I do think, like, in terms of having a good cry, I think you'll like it.
I'm going to call in sick that day.
It's really funny.
It's like
just
every
rank
day.
it at number 0 and call it a day.
Right. No,
I rank it nope.
Yeah, Fry's smart. It'll be like 34, some innocuous type of rating.
It wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Yes, I totally watched that movie. No one believes you.
I'll make it a real sacrifice. I'll put it at like 13 and be like, yeah, I really liked it more than I thought I would.
I hope you do. That way we said, Brian, you're the high man. Tell us about this movie. Just call you on it. You better read some Wikipedia.
That's right. Yeah.
She was sick and told him a story about his life a couple times. Yeah, it's fine.
Fry, tell us about the last movie you watched.
Gosh, the last movie I watched was awesome. It was called Conclave, starring Ralph Fiennes, and it, as the title suggests, it's about a pope dying and the intrigue along them electing a new pope. And there's a lot of it. This is a mystery thriller. This is not a boring movie. It is a slow burn in terms of there's not a whole lot you can have of cardinals doing to one another, but it's man, I ate it up. It was an engrossing film. It was exciting in its way and super. I definitely recommend it. Really do.
Yeah, it's on my watch list. Anything with Ralph Fiennes and John Lithgow. Yeah,
love him.
Yep, and Tucci does a great job in it too. Stanley Tucci was fantastic in it.
Lizzie, what's the last movie you watched?
Really quickly before I say what I've been watching, I have been running, which is super strange, but I've been jogging to the soundtrack of The Prince of Egypt. And I'm
Okay.
obsessed with him. And
Great
he's so
soundtrack, yeah.
fantastic. He's like, I just love, he can do no wrong. Anyway, super random, but my husband and I have been incredibly busy for reasons we won't get into here. But we've been just like running on empty. So one night we just decided to put on just a stupid movie that we could both just turn our brains off to. And we chose Anchorman, and we haven't watched it. And I don't think I've seen that movie in like 15 years easily. I mean, it has been a long time. And there are so many tiny little things that I completely forgot about. Like I forgot about Brick, like completely. Like Steve Carell being in it entirely, I totally forgot about. And it was a delightful 90 minutes of my life just to be able to laugh and about things that are just so stupid. It was great.
I used to be a bit of a Will Ferrell hater, and Anchorman was part of me turning it around a little bit. I'd gotten annoyed with him on some movies, and I was really off on him. And then I watched Anchorman, and I was like,
it's really good.
It's a funny movie.
Yeah, it's very quotable. I mean, Milk was a bad
very
decision.
quotable.
Comes up more often than I think.
It really does. Like even just like the stupid stuff. Like I love Lamp. I love Lamp. Or like what? I could be getting this wrong here, but I'm pretty sure the Diversity is an old wooden ship. It's like, Ron, I'm sure I highly doubt that this station's concerned about the lack of an old wooden ship.
I think it's even funnier given that what we're living through right now. It's like Diversity's an old wooden ship.
Yeah, don't give that answer. 100% do not give that answer. HR people do not have souls. They do not find humor in this.
Oh, it was really funny.
My last movie I watched Out There Halloween Mega Tape. So it's by the people that did the NUF Halloween special. They do a bunch of commercials intercut in between, and it's from the 90s. It will all seem very familiar, even though they're parodies. It's a unique looking movie. WNUF Halloween special is my preferred one. It's got 80s type commercials, but it's a fun time. First one was spooky. This one was more tongue-in-cheek, but good movie to check out. Brian, this is your dealer's choice. What movie are we talking about today?
We are doing Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven.
That's right, with Orlando Bloom, Eva Green, Jeremy Irons, David Thewlis, Brendan Gleeson, Marton, Csokas, and Liam Neeson from 2005. It has a budget of $130 million. It only grosses $47 million domestically. That's no bueno. Worldwide, it gets $218 million. Place in the box office is 63. It's just behind Munich. Another good movie.
Also a great movie. Yeah.
Right. And it is just ahead of Boogeyman. Not a great movie. The number one movie that year, another not a great movie, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Strong feelings there. IMDb does give this a 7.3. The critics' Rotten Tomato meter, they are very hard on this movie. 39%. That I'm stunned to see that number. Audience score 72%. It does get nominated and a couple of awards as well. So Goya Awards nominee for Best Costume Design. It's a Satellite Award winner for Outstanding Original Score. And picks up 4 other nominees from Saturn Awards for Outstanding Actor, Outstanding Art Direction, Outstanding Costume Design, and Outstanding Visual Effects. Weirdly, it is nominated for Teen Choice Awards. This doesn't strike me as a teen-type movie, but nevertheless...
It's Orlando Bloom of it all, probably.
There you go. Okay, thank you for putting that piece together for me.
And I also think a lot of the critics slamming this was a little Orlando Bloom fatigue. This movie got this movie got wildly overlooked.
Yeah, it's nominated for Choice Movie Action Adventure, which is not the category I would throw this in at all. Also, Action Adventure, Thriller, Actor, and choice movie love scene, and
Yeah.
choice movie lip lock. A lot of questionable nominations here. What are you doing, Teen Choice Awards? Brian, this is your dealer's choice, so I'm going to skip you first. Lizzie, had you seen this movie before?
No. So I've seen posters of it, but I had never really registered it or really kind of given it the time of day, if I'm being totally honest. And it's not out of disdain for it at all. It was just more out of just wasn't, I never really took the time to even really allow it to be on my radar. So this is kind of one of those movies that just I missed. In 2005, I was a junior in high school. So I was super, super into Pirates of the Caribbean. So it's likely that had this come up on like my metaphorical desk, I would have watched this. But for whatever reason I hadn't. And I'm actually really glad that I watched it. The concept of this movie is like 10 out of 10 for me. Like I really, really love the bones of this movie. I was really, really excited to watch it. I think it left a little to be desired, if I'm being totally honest, but I left satisfied. And I am excited to talk about it after we spoil it.
Excellent. Brian, dealer's choice. Assume you've seen this. How'd it hold up for you?
So when I initially saw this in theaters, just being a Ridley Scott fan, you know, I went in saying, okay, I'm with the general idea that there's Orlando Bloom fatigue. We had done Lord of the Rings. I think there were some pirates in there too, and I wished he wasn't the main character. Now, almost 20 years later, I was trying to do a recast on him because that was my back then. That's who I would have recast. I don't know if I could see anybody else doing it now because I have watched it and loved it for so long that it's hard for me to put someone else in that character role. This is a movie that had a phenomenal cast. I loved the premise. I rarely walked out of a movie and said that get this. Why can't we this? Like, come on now. And I wish I could interview director, screenwriter, anybody who had a hand in putting this premise together, the idea for making the film. I want to shake their hand. I want to, yeah, like I said, interview them. This is a movie I turn on all the time. Now, obviously, I don't have time to watch it end to end every time, but I'll watch beginning, middle, end, 2/3 of the way, whatever, and whatever I have time for. So, I'm a huge fan.
Excellent. This is a movie I'm glad you brought on the podcast because I am a Ridley Scott fan. He's had some misses here lately, but this is a movie that I didn't see in theater, but I caught maybe shortly after once it hit the Redbox or whatever the time period, Blockbuster. I don't know if Redbox was even a thing at that point, but some kind of video rental. And I remember walking away bored and disappointed. And I think part of that, I'm piecing it together, is probably Orlando Bloom fatigue. I'm a big Troy fan, but he's my go-to recast. It was fun that they put him as Paris because I hate Paris, and that's like the guy you should hate. But there was just so much of him. He was so prolific. And revisiting it, I had an entirely different experience. I'm like, why was I so down on this movie? Why was I so bored? I think some of it's maturity of just I grew up and can pay attention, and some of it is just sometimes you catch a movie in a bad mood or the wrong mood. So I dug it a whole lot more. I wasn't able to watch the super duper long edition. We'll talk about that cut, but I did in my spare time at work start watching Crusade education and history videos to go through and refresh up.
Nice.
So This is what the movie inspires me to do, to learn. So the best movies should get you to learn. Brian
Great.
is going to ruin this movie for us. If you haven't seen Kingdom of Heaven, please put us on pause, check it out. It'll be a brief 3 hours of your life. It's fine. And then turn us back on, and Brian will catch us up after the break.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
And we're back. Last warning before, spoilers lie ahead. Brian, can you tell us what happened in Kingdom of Heaven?
In 1184, a blacksmith, Balian, mourns the loss of his wife and stillborn child. He is tormented by his brother, a village priest, who constantly taunts him. Unknown to him, the younger brother, Godfrey, of the village lord, returns home from the crusade to claim him as his son, ask forgiveness, and ask that he returns with him to the Holy Land. At first, Balian refuses, but after one last push from his brother, taunting him that because his wife was a suicide, she was in hell, Balian kills him and rides off to join his father and the crusade, seeking forgiveness for his and his wife's sin. Drawn by jealousy, greed, and a small part of justice, the son of the village lord attacks their small band on the way to Messina, mortally wounding Godfrey and making Balian the new Baron of Ibelin. You are introduced to a variety of characters as the landscape and politics of the Levant are revealed to Balian and on his perilous trip to the Holy Land. The struggle to keep the peace between Saladin and the King of Jerusalem, or between Christian and Muslim peoples, and the agitators on both sides are revealed. Balian, driven by a deep need to seek forgiveness and a moral compass to do what is right, proves his worth several times over and comes to the celebrated attention of the king, his sister, who begins to hold him with great affection, and the jealousy of those who would have war. This comes to a head after one of the agitators, Renaud de Chatillon, attacks a Saracen caravan and prompting Saladin to attack his castle at Carrick. The king, although dying of leprosy, leads an army to meet them, and they part ways on another uneasy truce. The king imprisons Renaud and soon dies of the disease, leaving his sister's young son as heir. Her husband, Guy de Lusignan, is the prime agitator in hiding as he awaited for his chance to make war upon the Muslims. Through his wife, he instigates war and, due to his delusional strategies, is quickly defeated in battle by Saladin, destroying the army of Jerusalem. Balian, left as sole defender of the city, puts plans in motion. After fighting Saladin's forces to a stalemate, he surrenders Jerusalem, gaining all inhabitants within safe passage to the sea. He returns home with Sibylla, Queen of Jerusalem, who has abdicated her crown for a quiet life and peace. He is once more approached to take the cross by Richard the Lionheart, who comes seeking Balian, defender of Jerusalem. Balian simply replies to him, "I am the blacksmith."
Very good. Very good. There is a lot to unpack here. I think we're going to start with the theme of this movie because it's so central. So one of the major themes of Kingdom of Heaven is its depiction of religious tolerance and the flip side of that, fanaticism. Lizzy and I actually covered The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's obviously a very different film than what we have here, but it really has similar warnings of fanaticism. So what are your thoughts of how Ridley Scott has this story unfold and how he juxtaposes this tolerance and this fanaticism throughout the film?
I loved how, I'm going to get a lot of this wrong, so I'm going to have to paraphrase it. But this is, I believe, so at this point, his father has passed. He is now the new Baron, and he is speaking to I forget his name. I'm sorry. But he's speaking to the gentleman that was always with his father. And he's talking about how he's like, you need to go ahead and go forward to Jerusalem. I will meet you there. But in doing so, he kind of confides in him first a little bit, like, I'm afraid I'm losing my religion. And the response is, religion is nothing more than people doing, again, I'm paraphrasing, but people kind of doing what they want to do in the name of God's will. And he's like, what God really wants, and he points to his head and his heart. And I think that was a kind of a good encapsulation, I think, of the movie, because that theme tends to come up a lot. I noticed that Guy and kind of all of the people who are looking for the most violence always seem to, those are the people that are circling back and saying that this is God's will. You really only hear that coming from the people who are wanting to put God's will in their own hands. And I think putting it, and then in the very end, and it comes full circle, when he has now surrendered Jerusalem, and Sublime is upset. At this point, she's like trying to understand like why he did what he did. And he says, your brother's Jerusalem is still in here and in here, pointing to his head and to his heart, kind of bringing that all full circle. And it's just this idea of like, God wants our hearts. God wants our submission, to be sure, but forcing other people to give their hearts and submit to God is not for us to do.
It's interesting you bring up the character and you say you didn't remember his name. He didn't have a name. That's the hospital.
Oh, then there you go.
And that character is actually in there. He is thought to be either the embodiment of God or an angel. So that was.
Oh, wow. Well, he was very wise, so that makes sense.
If you get a chance to watch the extended edition, they kind of go a little bit more and add some details to why it's like he's real, but like there are some things where you're like, is he real? Like,
yeah, he vanishes at one point.
Yeah.
Ooh, so I like that. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a little bit more on him, and just to add something to what you said. First off, that quote is my favorite quote in superlative. So I've got you on that. But he actually has a fairly deep conversation with each of the protagonist adjacent people in this. Like when he's talking to Tiberius after the army's been defeated, and Tiberius says, I've given Jerusalem my whole life, everything. First, I thought we were fighting for God. Then I realized we were fighting for wealth and land, and I was ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
Like they, each of his the people that he's closest to have a moment of clarity on what they've dedicated their life and their faith to. And that's another really prolific thing in this movie.
Yes, because, his original reasoning for wanting to go to Jerusalem is because he thinks by going to this holy land is like the first thing that I thought of when he said, like, he thinks that if he goes to Jerusalem and sets foot in Jerusalem, that he will be able to atone for his wife's sins and atone for his own. But, we as Christians understand that, like, regardless of where our feet are planted, like, because of Christ's death and resurrection, like, we, no matter where we are, like, the veil was broken. So, like, there's no necessarily like place that we need to be in order to be in the presence of God. And so I liked that was brought up, and then it felt like towards the end of the movie he seemed himself to understand that, and I really appreciated that theme. I wish they would have expanded on that and been like a little bit clearer about it, but because I do think if I had watched that in 2005 when I was much younger and wasn't really like I guess the best way to put it was, when I was 16, my house was not built on the rock. So it was very, very, very much built on sand. So I think that that would have just like flown right over my head. So I would have appreciated if they would have been a little bit clearer about it, but I also like can appreciate the poetry in it as well. So I really did enjoy that part.
And his motivation is more desperation. And I'm not going to get into, I personally do not take a view of suicide condemns you to hell, but that is a common belief in to this day. And so he is being told by these manipulators, hey, if you come to Jerusalem and you can find the true cross and everything else, and you're able to pray where Christ stood, your wife's soul could be rescued from that. And so that is something a desperate man who loves his wife is willing to do. So I do like that, but it is fascinating because I think we as a Western society, even if you're not of faith or Christian, like you would expect that the Holy Crusade would be holy, that you would see Christians, if you don't know history, that you would see Christians acting in a manner that is consistent with what they actually believe. And that's not true at all here. The Christians are the antagonists, really. Yes, Saladin is technically an antagonist. He is attacking. But even throughout history, if you read about Saladin, what he's known for is generosity, to the point of where there wasn't enough money to bury him. He had given it away to the poor. He takes bad deals with these Christians who are often dealing in bad faith. And so we have that expectation of Christian in the Holy Land good. And this movie is showing you, no. In here, the Muslims are dealing fairly with the Christians. And then we have Renault go and slaughter caravans and kill Saladin's sister, just doing despicable things. And they all, even the bishop is basically,
Oh God, yeah.
which isn't historical. He was actually a decent dude from what I can read. I'm sure he did some despicable things, but they really try and make this more of a black and white of just like the women and children, God will sort them out. Like,
Yeah, they really do. And I think for the purposes of this movie, I'm fine with that. You know, Chad, I told you about that Thomas Asbridge book I read. I mean, it was like 1,500 pages, and it was about the Crusades from basically the thought of let's maybe do this to the last, you know, and the what happens after. And it was a fascinating book. I absolutely ate it up. And yeah, I'm not going to say all, most of the people in this movie were real people. Very few of them ended up where they ended up in the end of this movie.
Yes.
But I understand that for fictional storytelling, you know, necessity, you've got to do some stuff. But yeah, most of these people existed, and most of these people existed in the time frame with each other. So it's not like they're pulling, you know, dinosaurs out of, you know, a different period to intermingle with other dinosaurs from a different period. So, going back to the part you were talking about, Saladin, there was another line. This movie is full of lines that if you really want to spend some time doing like a study on various things that are said, but it's while he's talking to defeated Guy de Lucian, and he goes, "Why were you so careless to not live or to not learn from the example of the old king?"
I thought
Like,
about that.
I mean, there are just so many. I mean, you don't have to throw a punch to land one. And I was like, that is just a great line. Like, there's so many lines in this. Even watching it, I was just like, wow, that was good.
A lot of wisdom, and
Yeah.
it's all and done so eloquently. That's kind of why I was saying like earlier, I can appreciate why a lot of the themes weren't thrown completely in your face, because I think so much of it was done very poetically, and so I can really appreciate if that was just very intentional. They wanted it to feel poetic, and oh my gosh, but that line was good. That was a dig for sure.
Well, it was certainly, I mean, for our Muslim friends, we see them where they've probably traditionally not been given a fair shake. They've been the bad guys in a lot of movies, and that's just low hanging fruit, especially at post 9/11. And we we actually saw Muslim audiences in Beirut when this was screened. They cheer when Saladin picks up the fallen cross and places it on the table after the siege.
Hmm.
So it's hard to tell the impact or the meaning a film like this had for the Muslim community, but it's so interesting that they actually had to cut some of the things of Saladin. Like Saladin, um, Balian was actually at the battle with Guy and Renault in real historical battles, and he is given safe passage back to Jerusalem to collect his family and escorted by Saladin, who says, "Hey, just don't take up arms against me again." And Balian winds up asking to get out of that vow. He says, "I have a bigger vow to God and the city," and Saladin releases him from it. But these are things, if you're watching in a movie, be like, this idiot,
Right.
like, this guy just tried to kill you, and you're letting him go back, and of course he's going to take up the sword against you. Stop. So sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. We did talk about Orlando Bloom getting some hate, and I think you're right as far as the stories. His portrayal is probably the most divisive. In reviews, I find praise for a lot of the other cast, but he seems to attract most of the arrows. Do you like him in this role, Brian? You said you have warmed to him in this role, or do we need someone that has like more presence?
It took. I'm not saying someone else couldn't have done it, so please don't hear me say that. I will say that at the time, given that I really loved this movie right off the bat, and I still had that little caveat in the back of my mind, but Orlando Bloom. I still, like, having sat on this movie for 2 decades now, I look back at that and say that's unfair. Like, yes, there was some burnout on him. It oddly enough, the movie Elizabethtown changed my mind about Orlando Bloom, which is
Such a strange pick, yeah.
it's such a yeah. I get it, but I mean, it took me taking him out of a fantasy action role, watching him do something else. I don't know if it was just a palate cleanser, and then he kind of disappeared for a while, which he needed to do. And then, but I still had this movie. I still had the import of what I felt this movie was trying to do, despite the, I mean, I hate to use the word crucifixion it was getting in the media at the time, but it was getting battered. And I was like, God, this is so unfair. Like, it was either ignored completely for it, or it was, getting pot shots taken at it, but it was enough to where no one was really paying attention or giving it any credence. So after all of that said and done, yeah, I don't want to say I'm fine with it, because that sounds like just, being in the middle of the road. I think he does a great job in this role.
Lizzie?
Yeah, I actually do too. I'm not to be clear, I'm not an Orlando Bloom apologist, but I'm certainly far from a hater. I actually think he's a good actor. I think I can appreciate the fatigue, because going from Troy and Pirates of the Caribbean and kind of like all these like period piece characters that are kind of more or less kind of the same, you can kind of break apart the characters, and I do really appreciate it, but he's really good at it. He has an ability to be really earnest while somehow also being vulnerable at the same time. And I think it's because he has this like boyish quality to him. And I think that allows him to be vulnerable, but while still, like I said, just being very serious and very earnest. And I think that there's certainly things that you could have expanded on in terms of character development on him, but that's not really for Orlando Bloom. I think when like really thinking about like what he had to work with, I think he did a really good job. I think I was able to connect with his arc of being heartbroken and in the pits of despair to then being back in the exact same place filled with hope. I think that like the full workaround with me, it worked for me. I actually will take it another step farther and actually say that I don't know who else I'd put in that role. I actually think I'm having a hard time thinking of somebody that isn't like Timothy Chalamet or someone like random from now. Like I really don't know who I would put in that role. So I'm a fan. He works for me.
I've had 20 years to stew on it, and I haven't come up with a better option for
Yeah,
you.
I mean,
So.
you couldn't have it be somebody too old because
Can't be too macho. Well, I mean, obviously he's got to be like a son, and
yes.
I think another thing that really goes to his credit is him talking to his father. Like you see the man he became despite those around him,
Mhm.
without without the presence of Liam Neeson, and then he only gets to know Liam Neeson for a brief time. I know it's even briefer on film, but I mean, you have to expect it was several months traveling from his homeland to Messina, where Liam eventually dies. But one of my favorite pieces of that is like you see the bones of who he morally was already prior to Liam Neeson, and then he gets this onslaught of information on the politics and turmoil within Jerusalem, and then the task his task his father gives him to be a good man, and which he already was, but it culminates in him getting to the Holy Land, him doing a couple things, showing his quality, and then Jeremy Irons just kind of looks at him and goes, "Yeah, you are your father's son." So there are affirmations there that maybe not everything is nurture. There's just some nature there that brought him to where he was.
Yeah, sometimes I was actually just having this discussion with my parents. Like, no matter what you do as a parent, in the end, your child is your own person. Like, you can teach them how to go and how to make the right decisions and give them the tools, but ultimately it's their choice. And he does seem to have that very fortunate quality of ingrained in him that he wants to do the right thing in the face of a bunch of people that are trying, even for a reasonable offer. That Ava Green line of, "You will wish you did a little bit of evil."
Yeah.
Man, that's how they get you. Just do
Yep.
this little bit of evil for the good of something. What will you compromise for the greater good? And that's how
His
it all starts.
his conversations, as brief as they are with the King of Jerusalem, are some of my favorite tit for tats in
Great.
this movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you both. Like, I have a difficult time thinking of who I would recast. Maybe a younger Mel Gibson could do this type of role because I think of The Patriot and being someone that's far more charismatic and inspiring, like could get people around him because there's a sense of Baldwin the Fourth, the Leper King, kind of has this attachment to Bailey and almost unearned, like you've arrived and you're now the main character, so I'm going to give you all this trust. It's later earned in that battle where he stands against everything and is obviously going to be wiped out, and he's saved by previous actions, but up until that point it feels unearned. But I think Orlando Bloom's distance, like that's his style of acting, is almost like a distance and a weight on him, works here. I
Mm-hmm.
I think once you set foot in the holy city and you see everyone acting like they are, you're gonna have a little bit of distance and disillusionment if you're not buying into what Guy's putting down.
Well, they sent word. I mean, his ship presumed lost. They send word that he killed a great cavalier among Muslims. Presumably, there may have even been word that he spared the other one, who actually ends up being the more important of the two.
Right.
And then, so I think that the king probably has some decent intelligence on this guy, just in terms of like what he's done thus far, because he's had hospitler's word, and then what Jeremy Irons has learned, and I think he kind of has a measure of him already. And then Sibylla says it best, like, "I loved your father, and I will love you." So I feel like some of it is a like inherited piece, because that is how these people react to things. Like you inherit, like you are what you inherit. So, but I think he proved enough on his journey there with the sparse intelligence the king would have had to say, I think you are like your father. I think you're one of us more than one of them, and we can be okay.
Yeah. Speaking of Eva Green, she's always enchanting, but does she have enough to do here, or is she just kind of trapped in this love triangle? Like, is that her role? Lizzie, are you satisfied with Sibylla here?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a fan of the Sibylla storyline. I could have done like totally without it. I think I do. I think that in 2005 there was a very specific formula of like we need the hot guy and the hot girl, and we need them to have this like, and there's unrequited love, and she's married to the bad guy, and I think that that's like was a formula that was used a lot, and so I think that and honestly, historically speaking, I have no idea if like that was all a thing.
She gets the worst treatment historically of any character.
But I just wasn't I guess I think, and this is just my own like moral like nose in the air, I guess. So like this might come off like super annoying, but so I apologize in advance. But I think so. There's this point when the king kind of recognizes like I need to come up with like a plan B, because like this isn't going to work out for me very well, and I can feel like my goose is about to get cooked. And he and Jeremy Irons' character, they kind of say like, what if we had Guy executed and you married Sibylla? And he really stands against that because he has like a big moral, like that's like against like his moral code of wanting to do that, just for the fact that he can do that, and just for the fact that he could marry. He does not want a man to get executed just so that he can step in to assume his role. And I think the part that confused me was like, well, I mean, you already slept with her. So like, what's really the big deal here? So I think I would have liked to have seen kind of that moral fiber kind of across the board, because I really, especially since we're talking about Christians, I would have really liked to have seen kind of this like moral fiber on the battlefield and with brother and sister, and kind of also this moral fiber with respecting the sanctity of marriage, even if the husband's kind of a trash person. So I could have kind of done without it, but it was, it was fine. I do like that they ended up together. I do like that felt like a redemptive story. I just think the whole like her saying that when, like blowing out the candle and like the whole like seduction scene, I think you could just like cut that out, and I think I would have been fine.
So you'll be happy to know historically they did not sleep together. They were never together. She makes a power play, and she marries Guy and then anoints him as king. Like, she wasn't supposed to do that. She chooses Guy and kind of backstabs everyone else. And so she's much more clever and a different type character historically. Yeah. And you kind of danced around it, Lizzie, but I'm a little sad that Eva Green, who is good at the sultry type actress, I'm sad that that's just her role here as hot woman to obtain and then to provide a happy ending at the end. Like I want her to be more scheming, to have more involvement in the plot other than just almost an object to be passed around.
I couldn't agree more.
She is another character that gets more detail in the extended edition. You find out more about why she needs Guy, how they were betrothed after the death of her first husband, who's the child heir's actual father, and so I think some of that would be assuaged if you watch the director's cut.
But then she kills her own son.
I guess what I really want to get into here with this piece of it is the theatrical release left a ton of questions, a lot of which get very thoroughly answered in the director's cut.
Mhm.
Oh,
Okay.
Ridley Scott hates the theatrical.
Yeah,
He said
I
he's
saw
disowned it.
that.
Yeah.
Once I actually watched the director's cut, I was like, there are multiple times where I go, oh,
That's why.
okay.
Yeah.
So it really does help. And look, I didn't want to actually kill Dustin by saying watch this 3 hour and 13-minute movie, because I feel like he'd show up at my door with a sword. But it is the most fleshed out version of this, to where things that you didn't really like, Godfrey's association with the Lord he goes to meet to claim Balian as son, doesn't really come out that well unless you can really catch the dialogue fast enough.
Yeah.
Where you find out that Jamie Lannister, I can't pronounce his name. When you find out, when he
Talk
says
about hidden gems.
because he calls him nephew, and you're like, oh, okay. I mean, it took me a watch or two to realize that's what he said there. So
Yeah.
like you don't get all of that unless you get, into some of these extended takes. But yes, she gets a little bit more work. The whole basically intro to it and why he's there and whatnot with Liam Neeson gets a little bit more work. So kind of some of the questions that people had at the end that could have been connected. The sinew of the movie was much better represented in the director's cut than the theatrical.
I was watching it with Erin, and she was like, like a queen must always wear two faces and this, but when I'm just with you, I'll just be Sabine. And I'm just like, ooh, she is thirsty.
Yeah, she makes us several of those.
Well, it is true. I think she had this kind of, Cortez, like, I was born into this. Like, she had that mentality. Like, when she says, those things aren't made for people, or those rules aren't meant for people like us. Like, she doesn't have his mentality. This is more of a Harry Potter thing, where he's coming from the downtrodden, I'm trying to make the world a better place, and I see how terrible it is. And in France, a couple yards of silk can make a nobleman. Like, he's basically making fun of her, saying like, your glitz and glamour really don't mean anything in this real world.
Yeah.
And I do think that, obviously he's not without sin. Like, you get Michael Sheen's character, who's just the devil. and he's saying, like, I think you think you're without sin, and that's a sin. Well, you get the love scene with him and Sibylla, and he's not without sin. Like that.
No,
I think that was really the purpose of that, to be like, he is within temptation and whatnot. Just
that's fair.
That happened to be the thing.
Yeah, that was clear of, hey, this guy's nailing Christianity around all these others. So we've got to throw in this random love triangle and sex scene. I mean, we have Ava Green, so of course there's got to be. Right. Yeah. You need some spice, bring in Ava Green. But we'll talk about Saladin. I'm going to say Saladin because that's my West Virginia upbringing. That was how we were taught to say his name.
All right. That one guy at the dinner table will correct you.
Yeah. But Saladin, or they give his full title of Salahadin. How do you feel about the time we got to spend with Saladin and his court? And is there anything that stood out to you?
Oh, I loved the time that we got to spend with him. I feel like, one of my favorite quotes is the quote where he, towards like the beginning of the movie, when he fights like two different men, like that you were talking about earlier, Fry, where you think that he's killed like a higher rank person, but it turns out that actually the survivor was the one of higher rank, and he asks the question like, I'm your slave now, right? And when he says absolutely not, he says something to the effect of like, your enemies will know who you are, the quality of man that you are before they even meet you. And and then of course that debt is repaid later, and I will get to it in a little bit, but my favorite scene is the encounter between the king and Salahuddin, because there's such a respect between the two of them. Like, they're able to speak and come to terms with each other. Not only that, but then he offers his physicians to the king, and I think he seemed so gentle and docile, and I think he understood the purpose of being a king sometimes means that you do have to fight, but he's made it certainly clear that that's not what he wanted. He didn't want his men to get killed, and I think that that's a true leader and a true king. You know, Guy goes in at one point and begs for a war, whereas like a true king understands that wars are ugly things, and I really appreciated the valor that he had, and I think they did a great job portraying that.
Oh, Renault and give me a war. That's what I do.
That's what I do.
Yes, yeah. I mean, just like so vicious, and and then
Well-
to your point, Fry, like where, excuse me, where he after everything is transpired, like the second piece has happened, like the war is happened, and he ends up cutting the other gentleman's throat. He says that huge punch to Guy of like, you know, you'd think after spending time with such a noble king that you would have
Learned by his example.
Yes, and it's just he's just wise.
I think there are so many quotes in this that I want to bring up as we talk about it, but another one that I really appreciated was after Balian, who they just tried to kill, tries to talk the council out of marching away from Jerusalem to fight Saladin. He sees that Hospitler's with them, and he's like, you go to certain death, and he says, all death is certain, but I'll tell your father what you've become. And I mean, there's so many things in here where you're just like, that's good. Thank you for that.
Writing that down. Like,
Yeah.
There's a certain point, I don't know what age it would be for me, but somewhere in my upper 60s where I just want to pull out all these movie quotes that people won't recognize and just seem really wise.
That's okay. I do it right now, and people just roll their eyes at me.
There you go. But they'll stop rolling their eyes. At some point, you will become wise old man.
I'll be the sage.
Right. Yeah, I really enjoyed the court. I enjoyed the time we had. I love the flex of you guys are out there dying of dehydration, which Saladin at the time historically had filled all the wells. So they really were. It was a dumb march to take place. But he brings them ice, gives them a cup of ice. That is it. Same thing happened in World War II. Japan realized they were losing the war when they found out that we had a ship dedicated solely to making ice cream. Like when they found out that, they said, we are in deep trouble if the Americans can do that. They're also in deep trouble if, okay, they're bringing down ice from the mountains. They've got a supply. And then we get that great, and it's actually a historical line of kings don't kill kings.
I loved that too. I really liked that.
You brought up Game of Thrones. It's very much, he gave that cup to Guy, and so he's offering safety under his protection. This is no red wedding, but
yeah.
But then Renault takes it. He's like, nope, not you. I did not give you.
You don't get it.
You get your head cut off, sir.
Yeah, that was super satisfying.
While we're talking about the grouping of lords, I don't think he's named. I actually didn't look it up, but he's one of the other really outspoken Templar guys who's backing Guy. But he stands up in the council before Balian rides up, or maybe it's as he's riding up, and he stands up and he goes, an army of God who wears his holy cross cannot be defeated. And I'm just like, the level of lunacy to make that statement without any intelligent, like just wow. And you've got his equivalent on Saladin's side. Like you don't get to see it nearly as much, but you've got that guy over there too. So I do like the parody that they put into this film, saying, you know, just like Lizzy's line that she brought up earlier, and I'll quote it verbatim. It's probably the thing I quote the most about this film with other people. every religion has that guy.
Yeah.
Every single one. And some of them have lots of that guy. So
The ones that learn the wrong lesson from David and Goliath.
yes.
It's
Right.
just, you've got to make sure you're serving God's cause before your own purpose. And they get that backwards of saying, hey, God, we're going to do this. You approve, right? Cool. Yeah. No, not so much. Doesn't work out for them. Our time period, too. We get Gladiator 2. We get a sequel to a Ridley Scott movie that really didn't need a sequel. Probably shouldn't have, but we leave this film basically at the start of the Third Crusade. Brian, your summary mentioned Richard the Lionheart. Would you be interested in a Kingdom of Heaven 2, where we follow around Richard?
I'm not going to lie. I'd watch it. I
You'd watch
mean,
it? Yeah.
do we need it? Probably not. Would I watch it? Yep. Anymore, like here's my thing with Ridley Scott. If he does a cyberpunk movie or if he does a historical medieval action film, I'm game. I didn't mind the Robin Hood movie. I understand its flaws, but I didn't mind it. The Last Duel I thought was incredible.
It is very good.
Gladiator 2, I actually got around to watching that. No, it wasn't great, but I watched it and I wasn't upset that I spent a couple hours of my day folding laundry and watching it. So I really don't think. Let me put it to you a little bit differently. I never would walk into a historical piece by Ridley Scott and be like, well, he's not going to give it his all. Like, whatever I see, at least it'll be well done.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't like the plot. Maybe it didn't need to happen, but he doesn't short you in attempted quality.
Yeah, he has like a zealousness to his storytelling that, like, even in a world where you can recognize its flaws, you have to give him flowers for the passion that he puts into it. And I think that that's certainly respected because you can tell he goes full throttle into everything that he does. And so I think I totally agree with you. Like, if nothing else, I can really respect that and give some grace to kind of those gaps that I think could be potentially filled with the fact that I think he is pouring his soul into the art of the storytelling.
Well, he rolls this movie out, in the shadow of 9/11, and we are neck deep in the Holy Land. I mean, this wasn't a good time marketing wise to roll something like this out. And he did it anyway. And shout out for that.
Yeah, because it's really hard. I mean, circling back to Chad, what you were saying, you mentioned the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I mean, it is really painful to see Christians being painted in a really wicked light because unfortunately that's incredibly normal. Like, we don't need, I mean, we need new PR in a lot of ways.
It struck me there are 3 crusades that Ridley Scott could have picked of covering. The first crusade would be the reclaiming of Jerusalem. The second crusade winds up with the loss of Jerusalem, and then the third is Richard the Lionheart. And he picks this one, where really it is a disaster for the Christian crusaders. And I'm sure Ridley Scott was looking at the time period and said, this is the most interesting, borderline antagonistic thing I can do to shake people and say, okay, the Crusades are a black eye on Christianity, as are many things that happen around the medieval ages. But this was something where he could just point and say, even at the time, Saladin, Western leaders came back praising him, praising his generosity, saying, this is how you need to rule. This is how you should rule. This is how a king should behave. While all these other Christian lords are stabbing each other in the back, fighting, getting annulments, divorces, whatever they could to manipulate and get power and shed blood. And I applaud Ridley Scott. I could see where the timing, even though there were 4 years removed, I think there was a bit of that of anti-Middle East. Like we were just tired of seeing anything in the Middle East. We didn't care what it was. And certainly audiences would have been prejudiced against some of the messaging that he's putting out here.
Well, he used a little bit of, artistic license here. I mean, there were 40 years between the Second and Third Crusade, so Balian would have been around 60 to 70 years old by the time Richard the Lionheart would have been knocking on his door. But I agree. I think that the fall of Jerusalem, in terms of the characters involved, and if you're going to pick a place of intrigue where it's not just us attacking and winning. Like, I think it'd be like if you wanted to kind of do a weird run over, if you did the First Crusade, it's kind of like Dune. The Second Crusade would be more like the fall. So like, he picked the peak / downward turn of something because given the time that he was releasing it and the message he wanted to send, this was more pertinent.
I really thought I would escape any form of Dune reference this podcast.
Got it.
I thought I was safe. Unfortunately not. Brian is life will find the way, Dune will find the way. So we did talk a little bit about our time. We were in the 1180s during the Crusades. This is at the tail end of the Second Crusade. It is set in both France and Jerusalem. France was an interesting choice because nobody is speaking French. We had a whole collection of people, none of them with a French accent. But
that's Normandy. It could have been Normandy.
I guess. We do shoot this in two different countries of Spain and Morocco. Most of these scenes are captured in locales of, can't pronounce that, Russell. So locales of Morocco. Azorzate? Sure. And Avila, Palma del Rio, Seville in Spain. So south of Morocco is a visually captivating region in the heart of the Sahara Desert. So we've got a lot of cool on locations. This makes sense if you consider the history of the Moorish invasion. You get a lot of Middle Eastern influence on architecture in Spain and Morocco. We do have a flag budget. I love this. There's a flag budget in this movie. Know it. There are 1,200 flags with 650 separate designs. This costs $250,000.
Wow.
That is your dose of vexillology in this movie. Brian, you sent us a message beforehand that we will not be skipping score or soundtrack. I told you I had made a note that Fry will want to speak about the score / soundtrack. Brian, the platform is yours.
So, as my wife will attest, I listen to a lot of weird music. And one of my absolute favorite things in the world is Gregorian chants. I find it to be some of the most peaceful, centering music out there. When this movie came out and the score that was in it, like the first thing I did upon leaving the theater was try to find out the easiest way to download the score to this soundtrack. I was like, oh my God, I love this. I have tried to work individual tracks from the soundtrack into Pandora to find more. So I just thought it was beautiful. It was hands down the most beautiful scoring of a film, not just from a music standpoint, but a vocal standpoint. I like the Gladiator now we are free entry scene that I've talked about in the podcast before. I would fall asleep to the soundtrack. Like this is it's one of those things that I find incredibly peaceful for a movie about war.
They do get the nice assignment. They can play with two different worlds. So we do get the Gregorian chants when we're in Jerusalem and the Christians are in control of the city. When we get that, I'm with you, Brian. I used to have a Gregorian chant CD that I would listen to.
Nice.
There's a group that would do covers of like Stairway to Heaven or Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Sure.
And Gregorian chant. This is the type of stuff I would listen to. The other half of that is we get the Islamic influence. So you get the Middle Eastern chanting and calls for when we're in Saladin's court or when we're taking that perspective. And I think that's a really cool thing to be able to play in two different worlds, the Eastern and Western world. You guys want to hand out some awards?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right. MVP can be a director, actor, supporting actor. Lizzy, who's your MVP of Kingdom of Heaven?
Okay, we haven't really actually talked about him at all, but I actually put Liam Neeson as my MVP.
Godfrey.
I really, really liked him. Now, I have to admit, I am a Liam Neeson apologist. I love him so much.
Don't be. He's awesome.
I think he's absolutely fantastic. And, but there's this one moment that sealed the deal for me. And I was so sad. I didn't expect him to leave the movie so soon, but he really captivated me when, so I forget his name. So we're going to call him Jaime Lannister when he comes and, tries to take him back. And, they're, now Godfrey's been wounded. And so Baylor's talking to him and just saying, but he had a claim to me. I had a right to me. And he kind of gives him this like really sweet, tender look. And he's like, so do I. And, and I loved it. It was so touching. And it was only for like a blink and you missed it second, but I absolutely loved it. And like he encapsulated the look of what I would imagine a father would look like if he's desperately trying to make up for lost time with his son. And I like really, really loved it. So I was super excited for him and he captivated me for however long he was on the screen. So he was my MVP.
I enjoyed his witticisms where he looks at the one guy who's just being a jerk and he says something to the extent of, "You're not old enough to be one of mine."
Oh yeah, yeah. He's actually my favorite is his I walked 30 miles in the snow line on the way to school, where he tosses a sword down and he goes, "Let's see how you can fight." And he's like, "His hand is hurt, my lord." And he's like, "I once fought for 3 days with an arrow through my testicle."
Right. Yeah.
it's like such a like weird dad flex. Like,
he's just so great. Like
back in my day,
fantastic character. You fell in love with him very quickly, which was of course super intentional because you learn to find out that so much of he's really resting on his dad's reputation when he goes into Jerusalem. So it's only makes sense that you'd fall in love with him. It's intentional.
Absolutely. Brian, who's your MVP?
I went with Ridley Scott on this. Obviously he's my guy, but it was such a beautiful movie too. Like if you take out dialogue, which was awesome for the most part, and you take out plot and you just look at some of the shots that he did about landscapes, about choice and how he did it, about the vibe and ambiance the world at this point in time through his lens gave you. Hats off to cinematography, hats off to the guys who pulled in the cast. But you have to have the guy with the idea to do it in the first place. It takes a leader to do it. He's the leader. So all of the things that they pulled together, and hats off to all those people that made it happen. But he's the guy that, oversaw it all. So I give it to him.
I was really tempted to give it to Ridley Scott as well. I went with Ghassan Massoud, who plays Saladin. And to me, job. I couldn't get enough screen time of this character. And I think there's a separate and very interesting movie to tell about Saladin uniting.
That's the sequel you need.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the sequel you need.
Yeah. Kingdom of Heaven.
His dynasty doesn't end until the Malamukes. So
it lost a lot of power, but yeah, the Ayyubid dynasty.
It doesn't end. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Best supporting actor, Lizzy.
I went with Tiberius with Jeremy Irons. I truly adore him. And this is I remember him in people don't talk about this movie, but The Man in the Iron Mask with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's so good in that movie. And I saw that movie years and years ago. And watching him in this role, I saw so many parallels to that, because he's just this man who, you can feel how badly he wants to be good. Like, he really does want to do the right thing, and he wants to make decisions that will yield positive fruit in Jerusalem and for his king. And he is able to kind of see when he's, made the wrong decisions and kind of pivot. And I really loved his character. I think he was a really interesting one to follow. And I was always so excited whenever he came on the screen.
Brian, who's your best supporting actor?
I actually echoed that. I love Jeremy Irons' character on this. Like, as a person who is a stalwart to both Godfrey, the king, and then later falters to, Balian. Like, we head for Cyprus, like, good luck, I've lost my faith, and rides off. I felt like he was kind of the integral backbone of, everyone until, leaning and the decay of what the kingdom eventually became was too much for him, and he left.
So did they put that scar on his eye just because he played Scar? Like, is that
I didn't
why
even
we
think
did
about that. That's actually probably true. Like a little nod.
Right. Yeah. I
Love
love
it.
Scar, but I'll make you sad here in a second. My best supporting actor, we haven't talked about him, but Edward Norton is King Baldwin.
Yes.
He read for a different part, but then when he read the script, or he was considered for a different part, but when he read the script, he said, "This is what I want." And it's such a massively different role for Ed Norton. He's unrecognizable as just this
Except his voice.
fragile. Yeah.
Like, it literally took me 5 seconds of him talking. I was like, is that Edward Norton?
Yeah.
Like,
He's just such a fragile character, though.
but with strength. I loved his piece where, he rides out knowing full well it means his death, and can still front that authority so hard in the face. Like clearly, if you chose to attack right now, I'm dead. Like, I'm barely sitting on this horse right now, but I've got a gangster mask, and I'm saying withdraw or we'll all die here. Like, your play. Like, it just hits hard. It's a great part.
Yeah.
He's fantastic. He emotes so much, even with the mask on. I think that's really hard to do.
Yes.
Like, having your whole entire face covered, so where you can't even see your mouth moving, but the way he moves it as he's speaking and the way his voice inflates, you can still make a connection. And I think that's incredibly challenging. And so I definitely give him credit for that.
It's a great choice, Chad.
Yeah. Adam Driver could take some notes behind the Kylo Ren mask.
Angst.
Hidden gem, Lizzy.
I put the entire cast of Game of Thrones because it seemed like
There are a
you
lot.
had Jamie Lannister, and then you have Jorah at one point who comes later towards the end of the movie. And then I know that this doesn't technically count, but then you have 2 Harry Potters, which, like, I know Harry Potter and Game of Thrones are not the same, but they may as well be in this movie, because then you have the whole, I'm forgetting his name now, but the Guy's like right-hand man,
Reno,
thank you. The whole entire movie, I kept thinking to myself, where is this guy from? Where is he from? And I finally had to cheat and go look on IMDb. But he's the professor with like the one eye in Harry Potter.
Mad-Eye Moody.
Yes. And it just, oh my gosh, it drove me nuts trying to figure that out. So I loved all of like the secret little callbacks, but I'm telling you, I mean, I think this was Jamie Lannister's audition tape. I gotta say.
Nikolaj Coster-Waldau.
Yes.
And I've given up
What a
trying.
name.
I've given up trying, truly.
But that was like a second, like in the same way that you clocked Edward Norton's voice, like they didn't even do a close up on him. And immediately I'm like, that's Jamie Lannister.
I went on a huge Brendan Gleeson. Renaud is Brendan Gleeson, and he's become almost the like equivalent of I'm going to blank on the name now. But it's one of those things where it's like, now I'm following your family around
Okay.
because his kids are good actors too.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm a fan of yours. Now I'm a fan of your kids.
Like the Skarsgård family.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes,
Skarsgård
yes.
is what I was
Well,
reaching
then there you go. We're on
It's
the
like,
same page.
because I was a huge Stellan Skarsgård fan starting with Hunt for Red October. And I was like, now I'm following your kids around, man. Come on.
The
Yeah.
opposite of Will Smith. The exact
Exactly. Polar opposite of Will Smith.
That's really funny.
All right, so that was your hidden gem, Brian.
Oh yeah, definitely. I loved him in this movie, and in fact, I think it probably kicked that off. I'm not sure if I had seen Brendan Gleeson in something earlier than this. I probably had, but this is the one where I was like, God, I like this guy. I mean, not liked him, but
right. He did a good job of getting
he
you
did great.
to want
like this
that
guy.
that neck slicing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We talked about him, the hospitaller David Thewlis. I really enjoyed that role. He's probably he is in the extended edition a little bit more, and he would be the primary reason I would watch the extended edition more because I enjoyed that character. So great.
I'm sorry. He was Hamish in Braveheart. That's where I picked up on him.
Oh, okay.
Where he's like, test of manhood. He drops a stone at his feet. Sorry. Keep going.
Again, absolutely not French, but it's fine. Recast. Lizzy, who are you recasting?
I went with Marton Csokas. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the actor that plays Guy with Oscar Isaac. I find he's played a good guy in some roles, like I know like a Dune, for example, like is to bring that kind of full circle. But I really have enjoyed him in kind of his like more like wicked roles. He does a really good job of playing somebody that has the ability to be charming, but is kind of just rotten through and through to the core. And I would have appreciated a little bit. I'm not saying that I wanted Guy to be conflicted as to whether or not he was a good guy or a bad guy. I don't necessarily want that. I just would have appreciated a little dimension to him. And I think I don't think I necessarily got that from our actor. So I think somebody like Oscar Isaac could have brought a little bit more to the fold. And it is possible that I'm not giving enough credit since I haven't seen the director's cut. But just from what I have seen, I think I would have appreciated a little bit more dimension.
The Dune disease is spreading. Now it's gone to Lizzy.
It's a conversation for another day, but I have tried multiple times to watch Dune, and it is fallen into the same category as National Treasure. I cannot stay awake. I fall asleep every time I watch it.
Those are such different movies. That is
it's like what an interesting comparison.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
I can't finish them. I really want to. I don't know. I need to pick the right day, the right time. All the things have to align perfectly for me, I guess. But I've tried like 3 times now, and I fall asleep every time.
We will get you back on the podcast one day, and National Treasure will 100% be the case. Every time you're here, it's Nicolas Cage in some form or another. Brian, who are you recasting?
I have a really hard time recasting anything in this movie because I've watched it so much. Like, this is clearly pre-podcast, so like I've been on this movie's bandwagon for a long time. I thought of 2 different things. One, because you've got the whole 300 piece with Eva Green and Casino Royale. She was kind of being typecast in a certain thing, and I guess in a way this is also a typecast too, but it was such a like an earmark. But this actually goes back to Braveheart as well. I was kind of thinking about Sophie Moreau.
Okay.
Or Marceau as the Queen of Jerusalem. The only other thing that I kind of had in my back pocket for it is I would have loved to have seen Brian Cox in a role in this. Whether or not he was like, one of the barons, something. I just feel like his gravitas would add something to this film. I'm not exactly sure where I would plug him in, but which oddly enough is also another Braveheart thing. But
And Troy.
I'm not mad
He's
at
in
that.
there with
Intro.
Orlando.
But
Bloom, you know?
like he's another one of those guys that if maybe is the Bishop of Jerusalem. Can you imagine Brian Cox doing that? Convert to Islam, repent later. You know, like
Right.
can you hear like Brian Cox saying that? And he's like, you've taught me a lot about religion.
I could see it. I love him. I think he is
I do too.
fabulous in everything
this-
that he does.
At this point, I'm like, who else do I like that I could plug into this movie to make it even more awesome?
Well, I'm going to make you both sad because I didn't enjoy Jeremy Irons here.
Oh,
I didn't enjoy his performance of Tiberius at all. And so if I'm going to pick like a tough but principled person that could possibly be disillusioned by what's happening, I'm going to Viggo Mortensen. Let's bring in more Lord of the Rings characters into
I
this
like it.
movie.
I mean, I can see it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I could see it too.
Best shot. This is a pretty movie. Lizzie, what are you picking on though?
This is really, really hard. I don't know if this counts, but I kind of feel like it does, is when there's just the one singular horse and Balin says they're here, and the people behind him are like, no, they're not. No, not yet. And he's like, no, they're here. And then it just quickly, you see, it almost looks like an optical illusion because you see the one singular horse, and then just above the hillside, then it almost just like transfers to thousands and thousands. And it, not only did I think that was a really neat shot and just an illusion of it all, just to go kind of from one to thousands, but it also just, it was just very pretty, like, and just like the rolling sand and like the wilderness, and I loved it so much. I thought it was really neat and also really powerful because, you know, you're definitely kind of thinking what everybody else is imagining in the moment.
Brian, what's your best scene?
Shot.
Yes, best shot. Sorry.
I don't remember, which is shameful. I don't remember if it was dawn or dusk, but it's Balian sitting at the place Christ was crucified. He buries the necklace, but you get this shot over Jerusalem, and as totally agree, Lizzie. It's not about the place or anything, but having gone to places like Notre Dame and Sacré-Cœur and churches in Scandinavia, there is a majesty
Oh, certainly, yes.
to old places of faith. And I've never, like, until I saw this movie, I'd never really considered like, oh, I want to go to Jerusalem. But I'm like, wow, like just that part where he's walking up the hill and just the vibe that gives you.
Yeah.
I thought that was really impactful.
But
oh yeah,
then you read the news and you're like, I'm good here.
yeah, right. No, yeah. To be clear, like I totally agree. Like I've been to the Vatican before and like different places of Italy, so I can definitely appreciate that there is like an intensity to seeing like religious relics and being in that presence. It was just that anecdote was just more just on the note of forgiveness, but I think but I totally
yeah.
But I'm totally picking up what you're putting down. I mean, I could not imagine being like on the hill where Christ was crucified. There's absolutely a presence, I imagine.
Right. Yeah. And Ridley Scott knows what he's doing. He even flips some things on its head. So you have the scene where Sibylla is bathing. And what is she doing? She's looking down on Orlando Bloom. He's flipping that David and Bathsheba.
I thought about that. Yeah.
On his head. So he's very crafty with what he's doing. My best shot was one of the battle scenes, though. It's when Balian is eventually going to get overwhelmed, where we get this low to the ground hoof shot and just the thundering of Balian's doomed group slowly marching towards this overwhelming army. That gives me chills, and he knows the right music to play for that kind of doom determined charge. So that was a cool shot for me. Best scene, Lizzie?
I really liked the initial confrontation between the king and Salahuddin, because I think it did not go the direction that I thought it would go in. I had not read up historically on Salahuddin or how necessarily that particular part of the Crusades had gone down. And to be, I guess, as clear as I can, like I didn't know like what expectation I had per se, but I definitely didn't expect there to be like as peaceful as an encounter from both sides. And I think that I loved it. I just kind of fell in. I already knew that I really liked and respected the King of Jerusalem, and then afterwards, kind of walking away, had this like intense respect for Salahuddin. And I think I don't know. I think that scene was super powerful to like the overall message of the movie, and and also just incredibly entertaining because you're kind of at the edge of your seat, not knowing what's about to happen. So I really liked that scene.
Sadly, you don't expect two adults to feel the weight of what they're about to bring on each other and to
Right.
be reasonable. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. You'd think, but no.
it's a great scene. Brian, what's your favorite scene?
I'm going to use all of my superlatives as vehicles for all the quotes I like in this movie. But my favorite scene is the chess match between Baldwin and
Mhm.
Balian, simply because he's talking about the whole world is in chess. A king may move a man, a father may claim a son, but that man can also move himself. And I mean, there's this whole line to it, and you're just like, wham! Like they're just
Mhm.
Don't
every
finish
time.
that quote. That is mine.
That's mine too.
I guess going back to what I said earlier, all the ancillary characters to Balian have a moment to impress real wisdom that should be impressed outside of this film.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they all have gravity, and I love it.
He's got a bunch of father figures in his life for the short time he has a father figure. Absolutely. I'm going to go back to Guy and Reynald's scene with Saladin, and it winds up being Reynald's death. But that entire conversation and the weight of Guy being relieved to get that goblet, to get that cup, and oh, I'm going to be safe, where it would have been just to execute him, and then to get that scene of kings don't kill kings, and he's trying, even in executing justice to Reynald, he's trying to teach Guy, and Guy is not willing to learn any lessons here, and winds up getting paraded around, but
On a donkey.
Yes, with a fun hat.
With a fun hat.
They gave him a hat. Nice fez.
Little dunce hat.
Lizzy, what's your best wardrobe or makeup moment?
I have to say it's the King's mask. I was really into it, and I loved how, and they were different, right? Because the first one that you meet is more kind of smooth, and then the other one has more. I didn't know if it was
it's beautifully ornate
design, or if it was trying to, or if perhaps it was kind of had some like hidden meaning, or if it was just because it was pretty. But I really loved it. And kind of going back to the Edward Norton of it all, I really do like, I'll say it again. His ability to emote behind that mask was just masterful. So I really, really appreciated it. And just the way that he would kind of cock his head, and, when all the people in the court are getting upset, and he just will kind of cock his head, look down, and raise his hand. And it just was able to say so much without, even having any kind of expression at all on it. So I think it carried a ton of weight, and I loved it.
Absolutely. Those were great. Brian, what was your best wardrobe?
Baldwin's mask. Yeah, Paul. I was just like, yeah, Baldwin's war mask.
Those were incredible. But I actually remember seeing that imagery in previews and being turned off, and having watched the movie. Like, yeah, this is cool. I enjoyed it. But
I think it's a really important thing too on the makeup aspect, that even wearing the mask, and he's got this real fine mithril-esque chainmail headdress over top of it, but the eyes are open enough to see the bloodshot, saggy lids of the fact that like whatever's under there is not great.
And we'll
And
find out. Yes.
yeah, and I feel like that almost added to it because you've got this, pious looking garb with, what's decaying under it, which it eventually ends up being kind of a statement on his kingdom.
Oh yeah, it's a great statement on the state of Christianity in the Kingdom of Jerusalem at that point.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I really dig the shield work, particularly for the Ayyubid army. There's so much variety, and they come off in this stunning manner. And when we get that crane shot, the zoom out crane shot as they're trying to breach the wall, and it's a little goofy because you see people just casually shoving, and like no one's dying at that point. Nobody is telling them, "Hey, keep fighting" or whatever. But you see all the different shields. Some of them have the symbol of Islam on it. They have the crescent moon and they're green. Some of them have the symbol for the Ayyubids, but they're all just, the Crusaders have a more uniform shield, but there's still a lot of cool different armies going on. So shield work for me. Change one thing, Lizzy.
So I had kind of already touched a little bit on it about, I think, the sublime kind of love scene and just kind of like love triangle in general I could do without. But one thing that she said I would have wished that she would have done differently, and I'm going to butcher it because I could not find it anywhere to like get the exact quote. But she sees, they look at some and I'm hope I'm saying this all correctly, but some Muslims that are taking part in like the prayer, and they're bowing and kneeling, and Balin kind of looks just kind of with curiosity, and Sublime's message to him is something to the effect of like, their God tells them to do, and our God tells us to decide, and something to that effect, like when they're having kind of their night together. Would have liked that scene to kind of have been built on a little bit more, because I think that scene was really interesting and had a lot of potential, but it just feels like it didn't cross the finish line for me.
It's the Romans' argument of works is dead, and so grace abounds. That's at the crux of that. I unfortunately, coming from Sibylla, I don't know if that was her intent. Like
it's hard to know.
the role is pretty much just temptress and occasionally mourning sister, but
yeah,
I would like her to have more.
My change one thing is going to be there is an extended scene where Guy, after being released by Saladin and the Christians are leaving the city, this is in the director's cut, fights Balian one-on-one. And there's a cheese fest line at the end of it. So I'm actually happy it was cut. This is one of the few scenes that I was like, yep, we didn't need that one. Which is funny because it's at the end of the movie. Overwhelmingly, I was like, wow, you shouldn't have cut any of this. And then it hits that. And I was like, yep, that one was good. That was good. But even his adversary in the end gets the message of what he's trying to do, and I think that's really important in this movie. Was it's not just the tit for tats he had with his supporting heroes, his group of supporters, but also the ones that weren't. So it's the reach you have.
I get that.
Hero and villain.
So your change one thing is make this movie 3 hours and 11 minutes long?
Yeah, it might have been like a 45-second fight scene, so I don't know if I can credit that much. But it is the one scene. Actually, if they just not said the line that he says at the end of it, it would have been fine. I was just like, oh, gosh. You guys, in a movie of such wonderful dialogue, one cheesy line was just like, ooh, that was well cut, sir.
I want more nuance in this movie. I feel like we get way too into black and white, and there's definitely a fascinating story of rotten to the core with the crusade and losing its purpose and its mission and losing their focus. But I don't like the fact that Balian is essentially the only true Christian. Like, he's our guiding light. Once we lose Tiberius, Tiberius loses his faith. I think that's a fascinating story to tell, by the way, of disillusioned. Maybe he doesn't lose his faith, but he definitely loses his faith in organized religion and walks away. So
We got Hospitaller,
yes, who dies
Godfrey.
in battle.
I mean, well, I'm just saying, you're saying the ones who actually lived through the end?
Godfrey, I would argue, is not exactly the standout for Christendom. He has his moments, but he's also Russell doesn't like us to say this phrase, but he's a Horan. He's taking some trysts out there. But my issue is making the bishop despicable. Historically, it's inaccurate, and I don't think you need that. I would rather him be the guy that no one is listening to. I would rather him being, he gives good counsel,
Like
but
that.
no one's willing to hear it. And
Sure.
just to show how power has usurped religion. So government has usurped religion. Okay, now we're worshiping power, we're worshiping greed, we're ignoring what this guy says. So you don't need to have everybody suck. but that's probably coming
That's a
from
good
my own
one.
class. It's like, yes, we Christians did very bad things, but can slightly more than one of us be?
Yeah, right.
I still don't look at it as being just one. I mean, I understand the ham-handedness of perfect night. I mean, it's actually something that Tiberius says early that wasn't what Balian says. Like, he says that I'm to be a good knight, and Tiberius sends it back and goes, I hope we can accommodate such a thing as a perfect knight. It's not what he said. And so I don't think that I don't think that was my takeaway on it. I hear what you're saying, especially as the leader of the faith within the city. I think that would have been an easy, thing to not do. But you've got, like, even within his household, Jews and Muslims in Ibelin. And I just feel like, and we haven't mentioned Dr. Bashir yet, so apologies for not knowing his name, but I just feel like there's enough positive influx on guys with the right frame of mind that it wasn't necessarily a premium detractor on either, if that bell curve can make sense.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, Ridley had to make his message. But,
yeah.
Give me the priest. Best quote. Lizzy's going to steal mine. Go ahead, Lizzy.
I think it might be all of ours, right? From King Baldwin. A king may move a man, a father may claim a son, but remember that even when those who move you to be kings or men of power, your soul is in your keeping alone. When you stand before God, you cannot say, but I was told by others to do thus, or that virtue is not convenient at the time. This will not suffice. Remember that. That, like super, honestly, it feels adjacent to, is it on the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus says, like, that, like, be careful because, like, so many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Have we not cast out demons in your name? And truly, I'll tell you, like, depart from me, I never knew you. And that really, really reminded me of that, because it's just this idea of don't get caught up thinking in the moment on this earth, thinking that you're doing the right thing if you're not actually living in accordance to God's will, because even though it might feel good in the moment, you can't explain it away. And I think it was just a beautiful quote. And of course, you see people in this movie doing that. You see Guy and his people in the Templar, doing that kind of thing willingly. They're doing kind of whatever they want and then slapping that it was God's will. And Baldwin sees things for what they are, kind of that bigger picture of, I think God wants us to be living in harmony, and he's not afraid to fight for it and stand up for it. And so he kind of remembers that God is the ultimate one that we all have to answer to one day. I thought it was brilliant and super wise.
But then he falls to that very same temptation of, oh, when I'm going to die, Guy's going to take over. And that's not great. And
He sure
so
does.
when he says virtue was not convenient at that time, then he proposes unvirtuous
Sure does,
things.
yeah.
And that gets thrown back in his face. Balian says, he doesn't bring up that line. He just
So I did.
says a king may move a man. It's like, yeah, so I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I
yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah, the virtue was not convenient at that time is something that sticks with me. And I'm not great at this all the time,
Yeah.
but I try and impart to my child, who I hope is better than me in every aspect of, there's never a bad time to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one hits home hard. You really have to. That's a tough one, but we all deal with it every day.
Yeah. Brian, what's your best quote?
I alluded to it earlier, and it's probably something that comes up at least at some point in time with everyone I've ever spoken to about theology. It's, I put no stock in religion. By the word religion, I've seen the lunacy of fanatics of every denomination be called the will of God. And it's the part where he says what God desires is here and here.
Yeah.
I remember being in the theater and being like, wow,
Yeah.
that
Bullseye.
like looking around, anybody else just earth move? No, just me.
Right.
All right.
This is absolutely a movie about religion failing people, and Tiberius most of all encapsulates that feeling that you're pointing to of, I thought I was fighting for God, then I was fighting for this country. Now I don't know why I'm here.
And you know, the more we talk about it, Hospitler, the guy who says the line, like, he is truly throughout the film just one of those, let's touch base with some real gravity, because I don't remember if this is in the theatrical release or not, but at one point he's just in the middle of the desert and he's throwing rocks at a sage bush.
It's not.
And Hospitler comes up behind him, and finally a rock strikes right and the bush catches on fire, and he goes, there's your religion. And they have this conversation back and forth, and he turns around and Hospitler's just gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But a bush completely removed from the one that caught on fire catches on fire too, without
that's cool.
prompting. Yeah, it's a great scene, and it's what I said. Like, I don't remember if it was part of that or not, but basically it adds this ethereal nature of Hospitler's character, but also like him literally just trying to make a miracle happen by regular means, and setting this sage bush on fire by just chucking a rock and a spark catching fire.
I like that.
That's a scene I would want. Yeah.
When you get a chance, 3 hours and 13 minutes. When you get a chance, there's some worth it stuff in there.
I've still got to watch Return of the King with my daughter, so I am booked for my 3-hour plus movie. But you know what? We've come full circle. It's time to give this movie some ratings. Lizzy, 0 to 5 stars, half-star increments. Lester Brian, what are you giving Kingdom of Heaven?
I'm giving this a solid 4. I really, the theme of the movie, I absolutely, can completely get behind. I think it's powerful to watch as a Christian. It's humbling to watch as a Christian. It's and it's also just entertaining. And I really do respect and appreciate the kind of important theme that he was trying to, in kind of just the metaphors of this movie that he was trying to communicate by choosing this particular timeline in the Crusades. And, kind of like I said at the top, I think it left a little bit to be desired. Like, I wish that they would have put some of it sounds like there was so much rich character development in the director's cut that they omitted. And I wish that a lot of that would have been in there. I think it would have just helped to add so much more color to the movie. But overall, I mean, I really liked it. I feel like this is a movie I'll recommend. And I do think when I feel like I'm wanting to, you know, have like that night where you just like rot in a chair and watch like a 3.5 hour movie, I think I'll revisit the director's cut, because Aaron and I both walked away like really satisfied. We really enjoyed it. It was a fun like little date night for us to watch it together. So 4
So
stars for me.
the director's cut does have an overture of music in the beginning,
Nice.
like an Alexander halfway. I'm blanking on the word for it. Sorry, but
Intermission.
Intermission.
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, it recognizes. Look, we're going off the walls now.
Okay.
But
Well, I dig it.
It has beautiful music for all of those things, though.
Brian, what's your rating?
5. I truly love this movie. This is one of those. I'll toss this on. I'll watch whatever chunk I can watch at the time. If I'm ever like, I don't have anything to watch, this is something that's an easy win for me. This movie means a lot to me, not just from its import, but also just I felt like, in terms of a movie weaving together a message that was meant to be sent, plus making it an enjoyable watch, you can't do much better. And I feel like the IMDb rating kind of sorts it out a little bit, and it's really unfair that it got as beaten as it did at the time of its release due to whatever factor you want to choose.
I went 4 stars. I'm really, really glad I watched this movie again, because I didn't walk away impressed the first time. The second time, it's kind of like having faith flagellation. Like, it's the equivalent of me reading the book of James. Like, you do this and you feel bad about yourself. I feel bad about my faith. It's like, I'm sorry we were such jerks. I wish we could say we learned any kind of lesson. But I do really appreciate the perspectives he's introducing. I like the really important questions of, what does faith mean? What does faith look like? How is it played out? And how is it played out against somebody that doesn't share the same faith? I think there's very interesting conversations to have. Plus, it's just gorgeous to look at. So
It's a beautiful movie.
I think I go the opposite direction. Anytime I want to feel bad about myself, I think I'm going to turn this movie on and just be like, oh yeah, I'm sad now. This is the corruption that can spring out of quest for power. But I'm so glad we revisited it. So definitely thank you for this, Brian. We do have to shift gears, and there's just no way around this tonal shift. So here we go. You know, we've covered her in Conspiracy Theory, Valentine's Day, and Runaway Bride, as well as Mystic Pizza. Now it's time to return to the Retro Roberts Roundtable. Our next 3 movies star Julia Roberts. So option 1, we have Notting Hill from 1999. Set of circumstances makes Anna Scott, a famous actress, fall in love with William Thacker, owner of a bookstore in Notting Hill, but the paparazzi's fascination with her complicates their bond. Option 2, Aaron Brockovich from 2000. A flamboyant law firm secretary works tirelessly to gain justice for the small town wrecked by a utility company's pollution. Or option 3, My Best Friend's Wedding from 1997. When a woman's longtime friend reveals he's engaged, she realizes she loves him herself and sets out to get him with only days before the wedding. Lizzy, you want to help us out? Pick a Julia Roberts movie.
Yes. Okay, so there was a love triangle in this movie that I think we all agreed was maybe it didn't hit the mark, didn't go all the way. This, My Best Friend's Wedding, this is a love triangle. This is a really messy love triangle, potentially like a love square. Actually, really, this is this is like rom-coms at its finest. It's got to be My Best Friend's Wedding.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again, Brian. Thank you, Lizzy, for joining us. And thank you all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you guys to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Please subscribe, rate, review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It is audio only. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. at movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. And remember, producing and providing this podcast is fun, but it's not free. We invite you to support the show at our Patreon page, patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. Any contribution you guys give is much appreciated and helps make the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thanks for listening, be good to each other, and watch more movies. Brian?
Our faith is a living thing precisely because it walks hand in hand with doubt. If there were only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery, and therefore no need for faith. Let us pray that God will grant us a pope who doubts. Let him grant us a pope who sins and asks for forgiveness and who carries on.
Excellent.
Nice. Where's that